I'm Jacob Newkirk, and this is my story about a party in the desert, or how to make enemies and influence people to overthrow you. It's a story about a party thrown by the Shah of Iran in 1971, and how he tried to make the climate fit his needs, but instead changed the political climate of the entire Middle East. This is Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He was the Shah of Iran from 1941 to 1979. In 1970, he decided to start planning for a big party that he was going to celebrate the founding of the Persian Empire by Cyrus the Great. He wanted it to be a statement, a really big way to show that Iran had arrived in the world, that it could compete with the rest of the world. It didn't quite work out the way he intended. As I say, the Shah was installed in 1941 when his father was deposed. His father had been a very close ally of Adolf Hitler, who was definitely a German-centered leader in the Middle East, and the U.S. and the United Kingdom certainly wanted to have somebody who was more to their liking. He wasn't always very popular in the early years, but he was in favor of the Americans and the British having pretty much whatever say-so as long as he had a part in it with the Iranian oil supply. So in 1953, there was a coup that was later determined to be backed by the U.S. and the UK that overthrew the elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. Now, after that, the Shah began modernizing Iran. Now, most of the Middle East is Muslim territory. People are firm believers in Islam. But Iran, the Shah wanted it to be a secular, more Western country. So what he did was he began transitioning away from Islamic laws and customs. He gave women more rights, let them drive. They didn't have to wear the burqa, the veil, over their heads. This went over fairly well among most Iranians. However, it didn't go over very well among the religious leaders in the country. So the Shah decided, since he had the power, he was just going to have them exiled, and he sent many of them out of the country. Most of them didn't go all that far. Some of them went to France, England, some of them went to Iraq. I'll get to that in a minute. And although he was in the process of modernizing Iran, he did hold a fairly close leash on what people could study and what they could do in the country. Certain books were banned, and if a college student were caught with one of these books, they would be arrested, tortured by Savak, and that was his secret police force. Well, by the middle of the 1960s, he had pretty well eliminated most of the people who would have criticized him. There were a few that were still around, kind of underground. But by 1967, he felt comfortable having himself declared Shahanshah, which is, in Arabic, the King of Kings. So now, having made the country truly his, the Shah had the ultimate power to throw the ultimate party. After several sites were considered, most of which were not suitable, in late 1970, they settled on Persepolis, which was many, many years ago, actually at the beginning of the Persian Empire, 2,500 years ago at that point, had been its capital, and it's where Cyrus the Great is buried today. Now, it really wasn't an ideal choice because, as you can see from this picture, then as now, it was mostly in ruins. And not only that, a bigger problem existed in who, or should I say what, lived there. Mostly, the occupants of Persepolis were snakes, scorpions, rats, and a host of other types of vermin that really probably wouldn't put on a very good show for the rich and powerful of the world if they were invited in for a party. So the Shah and his people sent in workers to round up what they could, run off what they could, or otherwise kill these creatures. The ones that they were able to round up, they took them out of town, out into the desert, and released them a safe distance from the tent city that would soon be built. Leaders from around the world were invited to come to Persepolis, and the party was to be held in October 1971. He invited kings, queens, various potentates, princes, presidents, including Richard Nixon, who was our president at the time, but no party animal himself. President Nixon decided to send Vice President Spiro Agnew instead. And if you've seen any recent history about Spiro Agnew, he was more of a party animal than most people thought, having taken many bribes from many people from Maryland to Washington, D.C. and long beyond. Other leaders decided they weren't going to go either, so they sent people to take their place. Queen Elizabeth didn't want to go, so she sent her husband, Prince Philip, and Princess Anne, her daughter. The French president, Georges Pompidou, also was invited, and everyone thought he was coming, and up until a few days before, it looked like he was. And it's really odd and fairly awkward that the French president didn't come because, as you'll see, France played a very large role in this party. Another problem with Persepolis was that in the 1970s, the weather was really not all that great, especially the temperature. During the daytime in October, it wasn't uncommon for temperatures to soar well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and at night, it would drop below 50, sometimes below 30. So the organizers of the party had to figure out how to keep all these people warm when they needed to be, cold when they needed to be, and comfortable the entire time. Now, in a desert climate, this isn't easy. They looked into building a hotel, and that might have been the best solution in the long run because it probably would have cost less. But instead, they decided to use a more Iranian approach, more Persian, and they decided to build tents. And boy, were these tents something else. Now, yes, it looks like a very Persian village tent, as you would have seen back in the days of Cyrus the Great.